Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining the Ascent virtual open house. Got another great talk lined up today with Jeff Heine, our CRO. We've been doing a bunch of talks. Again, we created the Ascent virtual open house just as a replacement for all the conferences and events that got canceled due to the global pandemic we're in the midst of. We wanted to just have a space where we could share ideas, connect up with people. That led to the virtual open house. Today, Jeff's going to be talking with us about compliance use cases and best practices, what your bank peers are doing that works. Jeff, first off, thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. Can you just start by walking us through your background and your role at Ascent?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Ascent, so that really talks about our go-to-market strategy, marketing, sales, and then implementing and making sure our customers are successful. I've been doing this for a bit of time, so I have a 20-plus year career in helping companies, specifically financial services firms and insurance companies, manage risk. I typically approach the problem more from a process and a tech standpoint. And a really good example is the 2008 financial crisis. I spent the subsequent years following that helping remediate the OTC derivatives contracts and helping banks and other institutions report against risk-weighted assets, et cetera. Also regulatory reporting, which is what brought me to Ascent.
Awesome. So today I wanted to sort of focus on, with risk and compliance teams, how they're using technology to solve some of the problems that are facing them. We've talked a lot about that throughout these different sessions, but I want to talk with you specifically about how they're doing technology around regulatory change management and some of the things you've seen in your experience. So to get us started, can you just walk us through sort of how we see the major stages of change management at Ascent?
Yeah, so change management itself really kind of talks about the whole monitoring of the regulatory and legislative landscape. So it would be monitoring. Then there's the identification phase that specifically is around potential changes as they may relate to them. I would remark that for existing regulations and also new, that distinction is quite important. And then we also have to analyze any of those changes. And then downstream, you're going to talk about the actual management of that work that you identify, and then the actual execution of the compliance programs itself.
Awesome. Let's just start with the first one there. So using that framework, how can technology help with that monitoring stage?
Yeah, and this is a big one because if you actually put yourself in either a risk or compliance officer's shoes, depending upon how big their business is and the different jurisdictions, most of the time they're actually searching regulatory websites, looking at different news feeds. There's a number of legacy content feeds out there, and what ends up happening is there's basically several threads that they have to follow and track. And if you're kind of familiar with the funnel metaphor, if you pour too much water too quickly, it tends to spill over. And that's the fear. It's languaged in the sense of like, I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. So when you think about consolidating all of those feeds into one, so you literally have one spot to go look and have trust that you're going to see everything that might apply to your business, is pretty important, quite topical now too, when you start thinking about technology. I hear a lot about this consolidation, which is important. There's also, when you start talking about this horizon scanning, which is a very popular way of describing it, is there's a number of folks in the business that are a part of that. Well, now those folks are work from home. So if you're able to actually not only consolidate that feed and also give those folks the ability to collaborate and report and track against that activity, it gives you much more certainty that your starting point it is solid and sound.
Yeah, it speaks to the importance of having cloud-based solutions that you're using or things that are able to adapt to a work from home environment if needed.
Yeah, and the time savings you can get from that, which generally equates into cost and risk reduction at every level that we talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So let's move to the next phase. And so in the identify stage, after you've aggregated all those documents together, how does technology help in that identifying stage and tracking changes as you're seeing them?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, now think about that too. You not only get the sea of documents and whatnot coming at you and different changes, you now have to somehow pilfer through that and figure out what applies to you. And if you think about the way modern technologies, there's often talk about the different documents and channeling to folks. The other part is you can actually understand a business technically and kind of what business they conduct, the transactions they execute, type of entity they are, and marry that. So rather than just manually searching through to figure out what rule changes and or what new regulations apply, you can actually flag and identify those actual changes for the folks that actually cover and need to identify those changes and even give them some basic ways to look at that. So there's a lot of safeguards you can put in with technology and make sure that you apply it to their business. And that's one of those areas I'm excited to talk about with the market, is that modern technology can help you make sure you create that certainty, including all those rule changes or new regulations you may not have been familiar with.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk all the time about how the workload on risk and compliance teams has just become so overwhelming the last handful of years with the ramp up in the amount of regulatory updates that are being released. And then with this new, tumultuous market, possible bear market we're entering into, it shows all the more need why you need technology to help solve those kind of problems.
Definitely.
Okay, so then after the identify stage, the third one you mentioned there was analyzing. I know this is like one of the sort of most complicated stages usually, because it's just brings in a lot of different pieces. And I think it's often sort of a trust gap for how technology can actually help in this stage. Can you talk a little bit about that and how technology can or cannot make a difference?
Yeah. This is a really important one. And I think there's a number of solutions on the market and approaches, frankly, that say, let me take a look through everything and then see the rule change and then start reading and looking at that. Part of what I want to encourage folks to do is think about it, that there's modern technologies out there. And obviously with Ascent, we know pretty well there, that don't just start with the change. They start with understanding all the regulatory obligations that apply to a business. And that's a way where, based upon the business they conduct and being able to identify those changes, what obligations apply. So you have the great baseline to start from, and then you can start taking a look at the changes in a systematic way. That right there gives that certainty you're looking for. And the key is that oftentimes there's a press release with a notice that there's a finalized rule. Well, you eventually need to go to the rule books. If you can actually create the connections from all down to the press release, to the rule book, to the actual obligation, give that holistic view on change, it dramatically reduces the time, but more importantly, just takes a lot of risk out of that. And that's where I see a lot of disconnect between the actual obligations and the rules that they need to maintain versus the changes, and you need to make that connection happen. And modern technology out there can make that happen.
Awesome. Are there any examples that come to mind, work Ascent's done with other companies, pilots like that, where we've seen sort of the power of that technology to make a difference?
Yeah, for sure. There's a whole litany of examples. And, I think actually just kind of pulling that in, am I allowed to mention names?
Yeah.
Okay. So with ING and Combank, they had an example where they had a great benchmark, and they covered MiFID II manually and did a really nice job and actually created traceability matrices off of that. Well, both actually applied Ascent, and with a handful of minutes, I think it was 2.5 minutes, they were able to identify the actual work and the specific regulatory obligations that applied, equated to 1,800 hours of people effort. A significant idea. And then really, think about that, getting to that point of certainty. There's another example where I can't necessarily mention the name. There's where GDPR, which kind of cuts across every business, obviously starting out of Europe, after a handful of consultants, did some work and basically trying to make sure they understood all the intricacies of GDPR and how that applied to various businesses. And this is really critical. We were able to do it in minutes and at a fraction of that cost. And to keep up with the theme here, there's the backbone, the digital backbone our CEO often mentions, and then the changes flow through that. So you have that certainty that you know exactly what's happening. And that disconnect was between regulatory change and the obligations is another gap that we actually help. One other point that's kind of related on this too, we just had a recent discussion around, somebody that sits in the chair that actually is a compliance officer and looks at change. And he said, okay, well, if we could solve some problems for you, what is it that? And they said, look, we want to know what we know, and then all those changes on that. If you can take my 6 hours a day down to 1, and I said, wait a minute, you said 6 a day. That's the reality folks are dealing with. So when you put that into numbers, there's a dramatic shift of understanding what applies to them. Now, once they do, which we can help them, imagine the dramatic shift in what they can do in actual compliance activities. That's what's really exciting about this. And that's really what gets into the risk reduction that's possible.
Yeah, I like that. letting them know what they know too, right? Because we talk a lot about creating regulatory knowledge and how our technology does that. I think that really speaks to the importance of that. Is it's using technology to equip these teams with knowledge so that then they can go and do the work that they need to do.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about AI, and you notice this is the first time I'm bringing it up. It's important. We use it because it helps with the scale issue. But in the end, what we're doing is we're serving very qualified risk and compliance personnel that are woefully understaffed with an mountain of change to provide technology to help them keep up and get certainty. And today, it's an unfortunate situation we're all living through. The problem is only getting exacerbated. There's even less time that risk and compliance officers have to do this work. So actually providing help for them to actually know exactly what their starting point is an enormous gain for them and also their business.
Totally. It's a theme that's popped up in a lot of these conversations is how, the technology we use at Ascent is coupling AI with domain expertise, right? Because we obviously have a bulk of it, that's the AI technology, but we have domain experts come in when needed to help train that technology. But our customers use it in a similar way, right? They're not using AI to replace their work. They're using it to supplement their domain expertise. I think it's interesting that comparison.
Yeah, and it's an important one, and hopefully you've emphasized that enough. It's not only just about the actual automation of getting all the different changes and looking at the rule books, it's those connections, but also marrying that with the knowledge of their business really makes this come to life in the sense that you're actually dramatically able to take time down. Another example is one of our clients in the UK just said, hey, look, with this process, we were able to take 50% of our time that we previously spent out with manual methods. And they said, and we're a lot more comfortable that we're seeing everything. And that's equally important.
Yeah, that's huge. That's awesome. So finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the current climate that we're in, because it's hard to not talk about the current climate that we're in. With the chaos that's been happening from the global health crisis, a lot of firms are hesitant maybe to look at new technological solutions, to take the time to audit them, to implement them. Can you talk about how firms should think about looking at technology in a time like this?
Yeah, it's an important one. I guess I have two points on that. One of which is, although we talk about technology, that's the enabling piece. From a user perspective, I'm presented knowledge, as you mentioned, right? So the startup in terms of actually consuming what we do is minimal. So there's no big system implementation, IT resources, and the typical way folks are thinking about a project. They can actually be up and running within hours, and our platform get good value. So I want to make sure that we kind of debunk that, although it is technology enabled, there's not the massive setup, and there's more immediate benefit in that way. And so, cost is definitely a sensitive one, but in terms of enabling folks, it's a very quick turnaround in that way. So I would make sure that folks think about it that way. The other part I'd be remiss to say, our contribution to this is to say, hey, look, we get what folks are doing. They're not necessarily able to take on new budgets, new projects. So basically, we've created an offer for one of our product offerings where any organization can put a user on the platform for free and just basically get the value. And the key there isn't just the free, it's to say, look, we understand the whole ethos of Ascent was started out of trying to help compliance keep up. And so right now, that's our contribution, saying, take a look at all the regulatory activity, make sure you see what applies to you. And oh, by the way, the activity is spiking because of all the different changing conditions in the market. So it's a very rich offer, and it's a sincere one by Ascent to make sure we're helping folks keep up.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, these are tumultuous times. You got to do everything you can to keep up with it. Awesome. Okay, so that takes us to the questions that I had here. Going to give it just a minute to see if we have any questions. And while I do that, I'm going to drop in the link to our open house page in the chat in this conversation. We do have a few more talks scheduled. Our CEO, Brian Clark, is going to be speaking with the RegTech Association late tomorrow evening, Wednesday afternoon, Australian time. And then next week, Jeff, we're going to be going through a live demo of our regulatory knowledge platform. I'm really excited about that one too. You can find all those conversations and the upcoming ones and our past ones at the open house page. Give it just another minute to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, Marcus, I just wanted to get out there that the offer we're making, it's a no strings attached, right? This is a genuine offer of help. And The other part is if folks are just curious about saying, all right, look, there's uncertain times right now, and we're not sure what's going to happen. I can't take on a new project, but I am curious. Reach out to us. Love to help talk about what's possible, and just make sure that as folks come out of this, they're as prepared as possible. Just general offer of help. We're happy to help them in that way.
Awesome. All right, Jeff. Well, I really appreciate the time and you walk us through these points. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up there. But again, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Marcus. I appreciate it.